So, The Napoleon of Notting Hill by G.K. Chesterton is one of the books that brought me most delight and surprise this year. The novel reads like a giant, multi-layered allegory, and it discusses topics like love and passion for one city, living practically or poetically, and seeing the mundane or the wonder in everyday things. I confess up front that although I enjoyed the novel very much, I don't pretend to understand all the meaning and ideas behind it. Fortunately, while rereading the novel, I came across a collection of essays by the same author written a few years before the novel. Some of them shared the same keywords as the novel, and they shed light on the author's thinking behind it. One thing before we go into the story, I don't know why, but The Napoleon of Notting Hill is not available from any of the usual publishers. I got my copy from the library. This was printed in 1961. But there's no Penguin English Library, no Penguin Clothbound, not even the Black Penguin Classics, no Oxford World Classics, no Norton, no anything that I recognize. And the editions that are available online, sorry to be rude, but they are all very ugly. Especially after I saw this cover design of a Japanese translation by none other than Hayao Miyazaki. Miyazaki is a genius. Here you get one of the climax scenes, but you immediately get the bewildering combination of the medieval outfit and a pair of modern glasses, the fighting with battle axes and the taxi parked in the same street, the shouting from the soldiers and the man in his flat calmly watching TV with a pipe. It captures the spirit of the novel so well. And one more fascinating thing, you can see the novel's title in English. The Japanese title above is Chesterton's 1984. The novel was written in 1904 and is set in 80 years' time. England is ruled by kings that are selected randomly. All seems to have gone well until the beginning of our story. A man who cares for nothing but jokes is selected to be the next king of England. Now he's king, he can humor himself on a national level and makes a fool of everybody. A cracking joke of an idea comes to his mind one day while seeing a boy playing soldier and battles. The next thing we hear, the king delivers a speech to the Society for the Recovery of London Antiquities. His Majesty proposed to devote his remaining strength to bring about a keener sense of local patriotism in the various municipalities of London. How few of them, meaning his audience, knew the legends of their own boroughs. A borough is a district of London, to put it very simply. The king continued, being called, however unworthily, to this high estate, I have resolved that, so far as possible, this neglect shall cease. I desire no military glory. I lay claim to no constitutional equality with Justinian or Alfred. If I can go down to history as the man who saved from extinction a few old English customs, if our descendants can say it was through this man, humble as he was, that the 10 turnips are still eaten in Fulham, and the Putney parish councillor still shaves one half of his head, I shall look my great fathers reverently, but not fearfully in the face, when I go down to the last house of kings. I can't find any old custom about 10 turnips in Fulham on the internet, and I can't believe anyone shaved one half of their head. I think the king or Chesterton is just making fun of them. So, he wants to bring about a sense of local patriotism and save old English customs. How will he achieve those things? Here comes the punchlines and what set the story in motion. All these boroughs where you were born and hope to lay your bones shall be reinstated in their ancient magnificence. Hammersmith, Kensington, Bayswater, Chelsea, Battersea, Clapham, Balham, and 100 others. Each shall immediately build a city wall with gates to be closed at sunset. Each shall have a city guard armed to the teeth. Each shall have a banner, a coat of arms, and, if convenient, a gathering cry. I will not enter into the details now. My heart is too full. They will be found in the proclamation itself. You will all, however, be subject to enrollment in the local city guards, to be summoned together by a thing called the tocsin, the meaning of which I am studying in my researches into history. Personally, I believe a tocsin to be some kind of highly paid officials. It's actually an alarm bell. If therefore any of you happen to have such a thing as a halberd in the house, here's a halberd, I should advise you to practice with it in the garden. Here the king buried his face in his handkerchief and hurriedly left the platform, overcome by emotions. It's all a joke, but because this is the king's decree, London has to obey. There are a lot of inconveniences caused by all these medieval ceremonies and costumes. Chesterton has a fabulous sense of humor. The complaints from the people are especially funny and delightful. No one takes the king's nonsense about patriotism seriously, except one young man called Adam Wayne. We'll pause our story for a second because I want to point out the first interesting feature of the novel. It makes use of images from A Midsummer Night's Dream. I was really pleased by complete coincidence. I read A Midsummer Night's Dream between my first and second reading of the Napoleon of Notting Hill, and as a result, discovered the connection between the novel and the play. The command to revive the medieval London has been in place for 10 years, and the honest Londoners have carried on with their ordinary life despite the inconveniences. Let's continue with our story. A few provosts, meaning the heads of these London boroughs, a few provosts are having a meeting with the king about some difficulties in building a road. Note the reference to the Shakespeare's play. Your Majesty may have heard, this is Mr. Buck, the provost of North Kensington. He began sarcastically, of Hammersmith and a thing called a road. We have been at work 10 years, buying property and getting compulsory powers and fixing compensation and squaring vested interests. And now, at the very end, the thing is stopped by a fool. Old Prout, who was provost of Notting Hill, was a businessman, and we dealt with him quite satisfactorily. But he's dead, and the cursed lot has fallen on a young man named Wayne, who's up to some game that's perfectly incomprehensible to me. We offer him a better price than anyone ever dreamt of, but he won't let the road go through, and his council seems to be backing him up. It's midsummer madness. The king, who was rather inattentively engaged in drawing the provost's nose with his finger on the window pane, heard the last two words. What a perfect phrase that is, he said. Midsummer madness. This was the first reference to A Midsummer Night's Dream that I noticed. I made a mental note and read on to look out for any more. And there were. Adam Wayne is described as one who lived on the border of fairyland. But he was perhaps the first to realize how often the boundary of fairyland ran through a crowded city. 20 feet from him, for he was very short-sighted, the red and white and yellow suns of the gaslights thawed and melted into each other like an orchard of fiery trees, the beginning of the woods of Elfland. That paragraph rings a lot of bells if you know A Midsummer Night's Dream. The contrast of the locations in A Midsummer Night's Dream is between the city of Athens and the wood. And here it's between the city of London and the fairyland that's hidden inside the city. But to help us make the connection, Chesterton specifically describes this fairyland inside London as an orchard of fiery trees. The woods of Elfland is the woods outside Athens, after all. Athens in A Midsummer Night's Dream represents order and authority, law and judgment and death. And the woods represents the opposite, chaos, passion and love. And London, in a similar way to Athens, represents order and monotony, business-like, materialistic, plain common sense. And Notting Hill, like the woods, represents chaos, passion, and love, although in this case, a different type of love. Notting Hill is referred to as fairyland or elfland a few times in the novel, and that's not all. I haven't told you the name of this King of England. His name is Auberon. It's a different spelling to the name of the King of the Fairies, but they sound exactly the same. And that's not a strenuous link. Chesterton explicitly tells us. The King of the Fairies, who was, it is to be presumed, the godfather of King Auberon. See, I didn't get any of this in my first time round reading the novel. I thought the King of the Fairies is from a generic fairy tale, and I had no idea Auberon is the name of the King of the Fairies. One important part of the original decree by King Auberon, in addition to the city gates and city walls, is the medieval outfits he personally designs and forces his subjects to wear. 10 years had not tired the king of his joke. There were still new faces to be seen looking out from the symbolic headgears he had designed, gazing at him from amid the pastoral ribbons of Shepherd's Bush, or from under the sombre hoods of the Blackfriars Road. And the interview which was promised him with the Provost of North Kensington he anticipated with a particular pleasure, for he never really enjoyed, he said, the full richness of the medieval garments, unless the people compelled to wear them were very angry and businesslike. Mr. Buck was both. At the king's command, the door of the audience chamber was thrown open, and a herald appeared in the purple colours of Mr. Buck's Commonwealth, emblazoned with the great eagle which the king had attributed to North Kensington, in vague reminiscence of Russia, for he always insisted on regarding North Kensington as some kind of semi-Arctic neighbourhood. The king said, "What delightful weather we are having! You must find your official robes warm, my lord. I designed them for your own snowbound land." "They are as hot as hell," said Buck briefly. Chesterton spills a great deal of ink on heraldry and ceremonies in the novel, and it sounds like he's making fun of the king's ridiculousness. But in an essay, Chesterton argues that getting rid of heraldry at the same time as aristocracy is a great mistake. Because, first of all, there was a thing as plebeian heraldry. Each shop used to be distinguished by a sign. And secondly, instead of getting rid of the symbols, the colours, along with aristocracy, symbols and colours should have been given to all classes. Chesterton looks back on the 19th century at the very beginning of the 20th century and observes that every man wears black from head to toe. To wear colourful garments is ridiculous, to be laughed at. And he writes this that I love. We are forbidden to say that tradesmen should have a poetry of their own, although there is nothing so poetical as trade. A grocer should have a coat of arms worthy of his strange merchandise gathered from distant and fantastic lands. A postman should have a coat of arms capable of expressing the strange honour and responsibility of the man who carries men's souls in a bag. The chemist should have a coat of arms symbolizing something of the mysteries of the house of healing, the cavern of a merciful witchcraft. I love how he takes pride in everyday ordinary things and sees the wonder in them. A postman is a person who carries men's souls in a bag. That's romantic and poetic. That's sadly not the case anymore for most of the year in the UK, but at Christmas people still write cards by hand and put them in post boxes. So for a few weeks each year, postmen carry people's good wishes and love in a bag. Chesterton definitely fleshes out this idea more in Napoleon of Notting Hill. 5 small shops stand in the heart of Notting Hill, and they represent all the civilization that's worth fighting for. Adam Wayne states his cause eloquently. "I was born, like other men, in a spot of the earth which I loved, because I had played boys' games there, and fallen in love, and talked with my friends through nights that were nights of the gods. And I feel the riddle. These little gardens where we told our loves, these streets where we brought out our dead, why should they be commonplace? Why should they be absurd? Why should it be grotesque to say that a pillar box is poetic, when for a year I could not see a red pillar box against the yellow evening in a certain street without being racked with something of which God keeps the secret, but which is stronger than sorrow or joy? Why should anyone be able to raise a laugh by saying the cause of Notting Hill? Notting Hill, where thousands of immortal spirits blaze with alternate hope and fear. Chesterton argues that when the great trumpet of equality was blown, they did not say, as they should have done, to the common citizen, "You are as good as the Duke of Norfolk," but used that meaner democratic formula, "The Duke of Norfolk is no better than you are." I think that sense of pride in everyday small things in one's life is closely connected to Chesterton's patriotism. I don't know what pops into your head when you hear the word patriotism, but according to the dictionary, patriotism is the devotion to and vigorous support for one's country. A similar term, nationalism, means identification with one's own nation and support for its interests, especially to the exclusion or detriment of the interests of other nations. I think Chesterton's patriotism is more like the healthy appreciation and pride in one's own culture and heritage. Chesterton judges early 20th century English patriotism petty. Why has the adoration of our patriots been given wholly to qualities and circumstances good in themselves, but comparatively material and trivial? Trade, physical force, a skirmish at a remote frontier, a squabble in a remote continent. Colonies are things to be proud of. Remember, this was 1900s. But for a country to be only proud of its extremities is like a man being only proud of his legs. English patriotism focuses on the wrong things, and Chesterton proposes history, philosophy, science, and literature as the replacement, because they are the more praiseworthy things of the English as a nation. In the novel, it's interesting to note the king forces old customs onto people, but they don't stir up any patriotism. But battles against Notting Hill unite each borough and give them a sense of identity. Patriotism is born as a natural result. We are not just a grocer or a barber, and the king is no better than we are. We are Kensington, we are Bayswater, we are as good as the king. In the first half of the book, Adam Wayne appears to be a lunatic that refuses to see common sense. When I read it for the first time, I was mostly on the side of common sense, thinking rationally and practically, thinking how ridiculous and irresponsible the king and Adam Wayne are. A madman single-handedly stops progress and turns a society upside down. Because his way of thinking and behaving doesn't make sense to his enemies and us readers, it really strikes wonder as the story goes on. Something more amazing and fascinating happens as the story goes on. Hat off to the author. Adam Wayne's spirit of madness spreads further and further to his enemies and us readers. So for the second read, Adam Wayne becomes less mad, and the prevailing good common sense becomes less convincing and less universal. I start to understand Adam Wayne and even agree with him. This sense of surprise and wonder is what I love most about this novel. The constant change of perspective is almost dizzying, and you can only get it if you read it yourself firsthand, and that's why I try very hard to tell you as little as possible in my October wrap-up, as well as in this video. According to another essay by the same author, this sense of wonder and playfulness comes from things not making sense. Religion has for centuries been trying to make man exult in the wonders of creation, but it has forgotten that a thing cannot be completely wonderful so long as it remains sensible, so long as we regard a tree as an obvious thing, naturally and reasonably created for a giraffe to eat. We cannot properly wonder at it. It is when we consider it as a prodigious wave of the living soil sprawling up to the skies for no reason in particular that we take off our hats, to the astonishment of the park keeper. This goes back to Chesterton's vision for a grocer. If we see a grocer with sensible eyes, it's where we buy ingredients for tonight's dinner from. But with an eye for wonder, a grocer is someone who gathers strange merchandise from distant and far away and fantastic lands, and a postman carries people's souls in a bag. If we see our city and our country like this all the time, we turn into Adam Wayne, both a lunatic and a patriot, or to say it differently, a wanderer and a lover. And Chesterton would say, if you understand those words correctly, that could be for the better. It's not a bus more than daily commute and a book more than paper. It's not life more than food and body more than clothes. There are many ways to interpret this novel, but to that question, my answer is yes. May you and I live lives that are not petty, but full of passion and wonder. That's all for today. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in my next one.